Hi, I'm Peggy Sagers, and welcome to our new DVD that darts are a girl's best friend. And while many of you would argue with that, the goal here today is to show you that you can lose so much weight just by simply implementing a few darts, and even without losing a pound. So in preparation for this DVD, I've learned some wonderful new stuff. And of course, you can't teach without learning. We all know that. So I love teaching because I really enjoy the experience of learning. There are two types of lines in the universe. They're parallel and converging. You know, I heard that and I thought at first I just started arguing with that in my little mind and saying, no, that's true. There's two types of lines in the universe. There are parallel and converging. And today we're going to focus on one of those types of lines, converging lines, because converging lines end up in what we call a dart. And darts are going to help us manipulate and learn how to do what we need to do to really help us look so much thinner and literally without losing a pound. So the converging dart, and if we recognize that patterns are simply made up of lines that come together, that's why we call them converging, but we're going to talk about all these different kinds of lines. All right, so if you're ready, let's get started. I'm going to divide this DVD really into four parts. It's going to be the bodice front and back, the skirt front and back, the sleeve, and then the pants. I didn't mention the dress, but within this format, the dress repeats the bodice and the skirt and the sleeve if the dress has one. So by covering each of those separate parts, we'll be able to see the role that darts play in any garment we're doing. And like I said, this is so much fun because I just don't think darts are really understood like they need to be. And this is my opportunity to teach you how much fun they can be and how easy they are. This is a basic bodice, and I think we've all seen this many, many times before. There's two darts, and we call this a bust dart and a waist dart. And in that concept, what we recognize is that the reason we have darts is darts are longer at center front, or the body is longer at center front than it is at the side. The body is longer at center front than it is at the side. So how do I get the fabric itself, because the pattern has to be flat, it's called flat pattern making, to be shorter at the side than it is at the center. And the way I do that is with darts. If I don't use darts, then I get the garment to be the same lengths, center, side, everywhere. And in fact, our body isn't the same. So we have the shoulder seam, and that's a dart. We have the bust dart, and that's a dart. And then we actually have the shape of the waist, and the shape of the waist is not straight, and there's actually some darting that takes place in there also. The first thing I want to do is teach you to move darts. And we're going to talk about these basic darts, and they again are these obvious ones, and they have what we call internal pivot points. So we want to kind of keep that in mind, and I won't let you forget it. I'll remind you several times. Internal pivot points is what we're going to deal with first. So we're just going to tape this to the board, and I want to give you a clear definition of what a princess seam is. A princess seam is when the bust dart and the waist dart are combined in a seam line that originates either in the armhole, the shoulder seam, or the neckline, or even center front. Actually, by definition, it's when the bust dart is moved to the upper portion of the bodice, combined in a seam line with the waist dart. Now I want to show you several examples visually in clothing so that you can understand what we're doing it and then know the rules that apply as we go to the pattern itself. So first off, let's just see the differences visually, and I'm just going to grab some clothing and then we can look at these differences. This first blouse, if you notice, it doesn't have any changes to the original pattern. It has a bust dart here at the bust, it has a waist dart here at the waist. So really, other than adding a collar and a sleeve and a front button-up placket, nothing has been done to these original darts. No styling changes. What we want to understand is that darts are all about fit. Darts are not about styling. We can sometimes build them in, but whenever you're dealing with pattern, it's fit first, styling second. You always want to think fit first, styling second. So that's why my darts are where we're going to think first. If we look at this particular blouse, we see a princess seam, and I did it in a kind of a contrasting fabric so you could see that the seam comes up here and curves to the armhole. So that means the bust dart was moved to the armhole, and that seam came up and went to the armhole. We'll show you how to do those. The other type of princess seam, and I'm just wanting to you to see all these different types of princess seams. Some people think that a princess seam is just when it goes to the armhole. That's just not the case. This is a princess seam. I want you to see the dart starts down here at the base, and it comes up and goes into the neckline. That's also a princess seam because remember, by definition, a princess seam is when the bust dart is moved to the upper portion of the bodice and combined in a seam line to that waist dart. So that is a very common type of princess seam that we've seen is one that goes to the shoulder. And you can see here that it starts at the bottom, comes up, or you may not be able to see because of this type of fabric, and it comes up all the way to the shoulder. Now, personally, I think these seams are the most flattering because they give us long vertical lines. And that's the one I'm going to show you today, but you could do any of them. The concept and how you move them is identical. This jacket right here, again, the princess seam. Notice that it starts here at the bottom, and I'm going to trace it with my finger because you might not be able to see. It comes up and to the shoulder seam. Notice it doesn't have to go over the bust point. I think a lot of us have always thought that a princess seam has to literally go over the bust point. That's just not the case. So I just want to make sure you understand that so that as we start to change and do things differently, we'll see this. I wanted to show you this one because this is a beautiful case of a jacket where the princess seam actually comes up from the side and then literally pivots at a harsh angle. It's not smooth, and it comes into the armhole. And you can see that with the stripe and the stripe in the different positions it's been put in. But the princess seam goes to the armhole. It just, instead of it curving nicely, it's a sharp angle. So you can see that there's lots of styling that can go on with these princess seams. And they're really not rigid, hard, and fast. So I think it's really important to be aware of that. Again, I wanted to show you this one because I've never in ready to wear this original. This is one of our patterns. It's pattern number 1600. But in ready to wear, I'd never seen a case where a princess seam, which this is, here's your bust dart, it's taken into the neckline, has been paired up with a raglan sleeve. And so the shape of that seam was completely derived from the shape of the raglan. So you can see that princess seams can take on lots of different shapes. If we peek under the collar here, we can see that here's our waist dart and there's our bust dart, and it is moved coming from the neckline, mimicking the shape of that raglan sleeve. So there's lots of different shapes. I think the best thing to do when we're dealing with these princess seams is to really get out of our box as far as what we think. We think they have to go through the bust point, and they don't. The bust point aligns to the nipple in female ready to wear. The bust circle goes around that bust point, and it's 2.5, 3-inch radius all the way around. Now that's radius, not diameter. That diameter is going to be about a 6-inch circle. So as long as those darts, this is a rule, as long as those darts come into the bust circle, they will accommodate the bulge. So that's really the only rule I have to follow, and it's really only in the bodice front that I have those type of rules. We'll see as we go through the rest of it that these rules loosen tremendously. All right, so in this particular case I say, okay, I'm going to move my dart. Where do I want my princess seam to be? And I can pick a location. In this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and start at the shoulder seam. I'm going to use my French curve just because I think it's the better way to do it. The French curve really is just going to give me a nice, pretty line to go through. So I'm going to actually draw my line first where I want the dart to go. I then make 2 cuts. One, they both are going to come to a pivot point. I'm going to make one of them where the new dart's going to go and one where the dart comes from. So here is where the dart is. I'm going to cut 2 but not through. Y'all have heard me say 2 but not through, 2 but not through. So you all know that that's what you don't do. You go 2 but not through. I'm going to cut along this line. I'm going to take that down just for a minute. It's a little easier to cut. I can see where I'm going. And then we'll put it back up. And because I have created what's called a pivot point, I now am able to close the dart up here, and it automatically opens up in correct size, everything, all the way to the shoulder seam, which is where I want it to be. So the darts themselves, because they are converging lines, they're angles, they will, when they transfer, they'll transfer to be the exact same size. So we always want to make sure the bodice fits like it should, and when the darts are in this position, and then so when we automatically change them, they will transfer to be correctly. Later on in the DVD, I'll show you a case where that's not the case, where the base must not have fit, and the side effects and what you'll see, et cetera, et cetera. Internal pivot points. That means the pivot point stops internally. That also means we have to sew them on the sewing machine. So if there's an internal pivot point, I have to sew it on the sewing machine because otherwise the pattern won't lay flat. Notice the gap between these two. That's actually what creates the princess seam. I'm going to separate them now. And you notice in this small section there's no fit going on. The fit's up here and the fit's down here. And when I sew these two together, that in fact creates the bulge and fit of the pattern. And that bulge and fit is identical regardless of where that seam is. So that's one type of princess seam.